Dawn softly kissed the Emerald Expanse Wildlife Preserve, gilding the sky in pale gold. Sunlight filtered through thick green canopy, casting shifting patterns across the forest floor. The air smelled of damp earth and fresh growth. Warden Ben Carter had walked these trails countless times, but today the silence felt different, heavier, unsettling. The usual symphony of bird song and primate chatter had been replaced by an unnatural quiet, a sense of anticipation. Ben halted at the edge of the western wetlands, where dense understory opened into a marshy clearing. A large, dark shape shifted in the shadows. A gorilla. He recognized him immediately. Jago, the great silverback, a rescue raised in the preserve, now its unofficial protector. But something was wrong. Jago wasn't drumming his chest or displaying dominance. He paced in agitated circles, watching Ben with urgent eyes. A silent plea. The massive ape let out a broken grunt and vanished into the trees. Ben's instincts took over. He dropped his gear and ran after him. Jago moved with desperate purpose, a black form weaving through heavy vegetation, and Ben struggled to keep pace. Then, as suddenly as he'd started, Jago stopped in a dappled glade. Ben stumbled up beside him, breath coming in ragged gasps. On the ground lay a great male lion, his mane crusted with dirt, his paw grotesquely mangled in a rusted metal trap. Blood pooled dark on the earth. The lion's chest heaved in shallow, agonized breaths, his dull eyes locked not with Ben's, but with Jago's. And Jago never flinched. The gorilla moved forward slowly, not in fear or menace, but in profound sorrow, as if he understood something beyond the present danger. The lion didn't growl or struggle. He simply blinked weakly and let his head fall back to the earth, surrendering. Ben stood frozen in disbelief. Lions and gorillas didn't coexist like this. Yet here they were, two kings, one grief-stricken, the other desperate. Ben shouted into his radio, "There's a lion in a poacher's trap. He's bleeding out. Bring the entire medical kit, now." At the station, the crew mobilized quickly. But as the humans prepared, Jago remained. He never left the lion's side, sitting in patient vigil, offering a solace no medication could provide. The lion's ragged breathing seemed to calm whenever Jago made low, grunting sounds. When rescue arrived, time was running out. Ben carefully administered a tranquilizer while others readied bolt cutters. The snare had sunk deep, almost to bone. One wrong move could cripple the lion permanently. Jago hesitated as humans approached, but didn't retreat. He watched, waiting. Questions flooded Ben's mind. How had Jago found him? How did he know to come? And why would he even care? None of it made sense. Yet there it was, a gorilla, refusing to let a lion die alone. Once the lion was sedated, the team worked with urgent precision. Ben knelt beside the mangled paw, sweat breaking across his brow as the bolt cutters strained against metal. The snare groaned in resistance. Then, with a final push, it snapped open. Blood cascaded from the wound, dark and heavy. The vet immediately packed the gash and administered antibiotics, while another ranger wrapped the limb in tight bandages. Throughout it all, Jago sat motionless several feet away, his great hands spread on the ground, chest heaving as if he sensed the gravity of each moment. When the lion winced at the dressing, Jago let out a low grunt that stopped every ranger in their tracks. Ben had never seen anything like it. Jago was known for his intelligence and loyalty to his own species, but this level of understanding for a natural competitor was unprecedented. They loaded the lion onto a covered stretcher and eased him into the transport vehicle. As it pulled away slowly, Jago stood and followed, moving through the trees alongside the road,
appearing and disappearing, but never falling far behind. The lion was placed in a reinforced recovery enclosure, straw-lined and shaded. The team monitored his vitals, medicated him, kept him comfortable. But something no one could explain was his unnerving calm. Even when he jerked awake in pain, he didn't thrash or roar. He remained still. Because Yago was there. He followed the truck the entire way, and now stood just beyond the enclosure, gazing silently at the recovering lion. Ben didn't chase him away. That night he sat beside the silverback. Together they watched the lion breathe. By morning the story had spread. Drone footage captured Yago's arrival and his unwavering watch. Scientists called, reporters emailed, but Ben wasn't ready to speak. This story was still unfolding. The lion stabilized. Yago remained close, sleeping at the enclosure's edge each night, a silent sentinel. No one understood why, but Ben had a theory.
3 days passed. The lion barely moved. He ate sparingly, blinked slowly, sometimes growled when pain spiked, but he never struck. The team had expected rage. Instead, they witnessed patience. And whenever the lion shifted, he lifted his head toward the far side of the fence where Jago sat. Ben started filming, sensing this was something science wasn't ready to comprehend. On the 5th morning, something changed. The lion stood slowly, trembling on his bandaged leg. The team held their breath. Ben gripped a tranquilizer, ready. But the lion didn't attack. He hobbled to the wire, pressed his massive body against the mesh, and laid his head directly opposite Jago. Jago moved forward, eyes tracking the lion's every movement. Then he did something that brought Ben to his knees. He reached out one huge hand, laying it against the wire mesh, fingers spread inches from the lion's face. And the lion didn't pull back. He simply closed his eyes, as if that touch, despite the barrier between them, was enough. Ben glanced at the vet beside him. Neither spoke. The truth stood before them. This wasn't curiosity or fascination. This was recognition, connection. That evening, Ben browsed archive logs. Something about the lion's worn collar had nagged him. He found a report from over a year ago, a coalition of young male lions relocated due to drought. One had strayed, disappeared into poacher territory, never found again. Until now. Ben cross-checked the collar code. The lion had been listed when he was 2 years old. Next to his name, a note. Orphaned during cubhood, raised near ranger station for first 6 months before wild reintegration. Ben went rigid. That ranger station had been near Jago's youth enclosure, a period when the troublesome teenage gorilla had interacted with other animals through fencing. Specifically, one curious lion cub who used to press his face against the wire and mimic Jago's movements. It had been dismissed as play, but Jago had remembered. Ben leaned back, realization washing over him. This lion hadn't wandered into Jago's territory by accident. In his agony and desperation, he'd returned to the one creature who had ever regarded him not as prey or predator, but as something more. This wasn't a rescue. This was a reunion. Before Ben could process it fully, the lion let out a cry, not of pain, but alarm. Jago stood, staring intensely into the tree line. Something was moving, something unwelcome. Ben's radio crackled. "Poacher tracks, west of the gate, multiple prints, possibly armed." Within minutes, the preserve's warning system activated. Rangers grabbed tranquilizer guns. But Ben couldn't look away from Jago. The silverback stood motionless, eyes locked not on the humans, but on the lion.
There was something in his gaze, memory and survival intertwined. Two men emerged from the scrub. Muddy boots, worn shirts. One carried a rifle, the other a machete. They were inside the perimeter where they had no business being. Ben moved forward shouting, but Jago didn't wait. The silverback charged the chain-link fence, slamming his fists against it, unleashing a roar that tore through the air like thunder. The poachers froze. One raised his rifle. Ben grabbed his tranq gun, but too late. The rifle cracked. The bullet struck the fencing near Jago's shoulder and ricocheted harmlessly into the earth. Behind the poachers, more guerrillas appeared, members of Jago's troop. Big, fast, furious. They came with the kind of rage only wild animals muster when defending their own. The poachers fled, stumbling over roots, abandoning weapons. The guerrillas pursued just far enough to drive them over the western fence. Ben ran to check on the lion. He was fine, awake, chest heaving, but unharmed. Jago, shaking, was unharmed too. What happened next shocked everyone. Jago slowly approached the lion's cage and sat down. The lion, without hesitation, moved to the fence beside him and pressed his body against it. Jago leaned in, resting his forehead against the mesh. The lion did the same. Two kings separated by steel and time. This was beyond friendship. This was protection, recognition, and for the first time Ben truly understood. This wasn't a chance. This was a promise that the wild, though divided by claws and instinct, was still capable of something the world had forgotten: compassion. By morning, footage had gone viral. Millions watched a silverback gorilla protect a wounded lion from armed poachers. Headlines poured in. But within the sanctuary, it wasn't about views or headlines. It was about survival. The lion was healing, but slowly. Yet his response to Jago's presence baffled the veterinarian. His heart rate decreased, his muscles relaxed. He ate more, slept better, and Jago never left. On the seventh night, the lion stood longer, pacing softly. His steps were stronger, more confident, but his eyes held longing. Jago watched, occasionally touching the mesh. Now there was restlessness in his expression too.
Ben faced a decision: keep the lion in permanent care or prepare him for release. Releasing a half-healed lion bonded to a gorilla was uncharted territory, but keeping him caged forever felt like betrayal. The board convened. Ben presented his proposal: not release, not containment, but something between. A shared, protected area on the preserve's border. Spacious, natural, minimally confined. It would grant both animals freedom while honoring their bond. There were objections, but ultimately the answer was clear. They had already chosen each other. Release day arrived quietly. No press, no cameras. Just a few rangers, a vet, and Ben at the hybrid zone's border. The forest held its breath. Inside the enclosure, the lion stood taller than he had in weeks. His coat gleamed again. The bandages were gone. He limped, yes, but it no longer looked like weakness. It looked like memory. Jago waited under a tree. He'd arrived before dawn, as if he knew. His eyes never left the lion. Ben opened the gate. It swung wide until the enclosure melted into open space. The lion didn't charge. He walked forward with quiet intent, crossing the threshold as if it were sacred. He paused, scenting the air. Jago stood. They walked toward each other with recognition. When they met in the middle of the field, there was no roar, no chest thumping. The lion lowered his head, rubbing it gently against Jago's shoulder. Jago reached up, placing a hand upon the lion's mane. It wasn't dominance, it was gratitude. Ben blinked, burning the moment into memory.
He'd worked with wild things his entire career, but he'd never witnessed anything like this. Deep in the lion's brain, past instinct and survival, lived a memory of a friend he'd once pressed against through chain-link fence as a cub. And he'd remembered. Over the following weeks, the hybrid zone became their preserve. Yago roamed the trees, the lion basked in sun. They crossed paths, stood in quiet communion, sometimes wandered separately. No fences were needed. Scientists came, reporters requested entry, but Ben kept it contained. Some stories weren't meant to be dissected by headlines. Some stories were meant to be felt. This one reminded the world that the wild still held secrets humans couldn't control, that perhaps in a world obsessed with borders and divisions, two animals the world said could never coexist had taught us something we'd lost long ago. Compassion doesn't need explanation. Loyalty transcends species. And healing, real, deep healing, might come from the most unlikely bonds. The video continued trending. The world marveled and argued, but Yago and the lion moved deeper into the jungle where they'd always belonged, free, together. Ben watched their forms vanish into the trees one last time. He didn't follow. Some stories aren't meant to have endings. They're meant to be whispered, like myths the jungle carries on the breeze. And this one would never be forgotten.